going to say before I say it. Amina, can you let me know when we live on YouTube? Excellent. We are live on YouTube. Hey, YouTube. How y'all doing? Hope everybody is all right. Welcome to the Lurie Daniel Favors Show on SiriusXM's Urban View. We are introducing you to today's edition of our segment where we get to share a little bit of our time with all of you. Now, we have before introduced this notion called New Rules for Today's Blacks. And the idea behind New Rules for Today's Blacks was a recognition that now that we are sort of back in an explicit racist America, now to be clear, America's always been racist, but we had this nice little 65-ish, maybe 70 years, depending on where you start the integration experiment or the civil rights experiment and its successes. But we've had, a good 60, 70 years of an attempt at being integrated, and now that's all over. It's over, and we're moving forward. And so as a result of that, we have had to incorporate this notion of reminding ourselves that the blackness that we experience as a result of being raised in integration is going to have to be a slightly different type of blackness as we go back into explicit white nationalism. So I have this segment called New Rules for Today's Blacks, where we talked about some of the ways that we got to move differently and we got to act differently. But because this is a new America, it's not just about new rules for today's blacks. All of us have some new rules that we have to learn about. And today I have an edition called New Rules for Today's Whites. Now, this is why this is important, because white people, traditionally, you all have been able to otherize everybody else. And again, we always make a distinction between our righteous whites, who are the small fraction of you that are trying to do the work of building a better world and weaponizing your privilege to destroy the privilege of whiteness. And we appreciate you. Keep it up. But the challenge that we all experience is that as we're moving into this new era of racial awareness, because white Americans are now claiming racial grievance in ways that they have not before. And trust me, I've had entire podcast episodes and previous conversations about this. So if you're confused about what I'm talking about, just pause here and go back to some of those other pieces of content. But basically, as white people who were not racialized, you guys got to be people. We got to be black people or Asian people or white people. As white people who sat at the top of this racial hierarchy, you all got to be Americans, right? Like we got to be black Americans or Latino Americans or Asian Americans. You guys got to be white Americans, So you all got to be the standard, and everybody else had to be a version of you. And which is really weird, because as Tom Burrell, who is the author of Brainwash, Challenging the Myths of Black Inferiority, one of the things that he says in that book is that black people are not just brown-skinned white people. Like minorities are not just, or people of color who are actually the majority. The global majority is not just a different version of white people. Like white people do not set the norm. In fact, not just white Americans, but people who we would consider white today, and I have to say it like that because remember, whiteness only began to be a phrase that was used in any meaningful way to describe human beings who came from Europe in the mid to late 1600s, when white Americans began using that term as a way of distinguishing who could be enslaved and who could not be enslaved. And baby, the whites could not be enslaved. Now, if they had children with a black woman who was enslaved, then yes, that half white child most certainly could be enslaved. But that's a story for a different day. Anyway, because of this racial hierarchy, white people had placed themselves at the top of it. But we're now in a space where, hey, white people have claimed racial grievance. They have said that they are minorities, that they are victimized by racism. They like to call it reverse racism. As we have already explained, there's no such thing. You're either a victim of racism or you're not. And they are claiming, yes, they are victimized by racism. From whom? It depends. It depends on the conversation. But what we often will see is that white Americans are struggling a little bit with this idea of noticing race and being racialized and still trying to find their place in the world. So I have a couple of new rules for today's whites. The first new rule for today's whites is that whenever an individual white person does a thing, we are now going to be forced to do to you what you all do to us. And so what typically happens is that when we were in the before times where you all were firmly at the top of the racial hierarchy before you began claiming that you were victimized by race, you all would say things like, you should just pull yourselves up by your bootstraps. And whenever an individual black or a couple of blacks did a thing, you all would use that thing that individual or that handful of black people did, and you would make broad, general, sweeping generalizations about all the blacks based on that one thing. And that was something that you all got to escape. But now that you're claiming racial grievance, you all are also going to have to be burdened with this idea that an individual represents all of you. So when an individual does something really stupid, like some of the examples we're going to talk about today, then we are going to basically side-eye all of you and ask ourselves, what is wrong with your culture? Is it the presence of white mediocrity in the home? I mean, it is important to have white fathers in the home, but if they're just going to teach mediocrity, perhaps we should think about something else, some other interventions. Perhaps we should send black social workers to your household to help you figure those things out. But anyway, That's the first new rule. You all are now going to be examples of your people entirely. So anything that you do as an individual, we will not only know in our minds that that is something that white people do, but we will now be comfortable saying it out loud, because what you may not know, white people, is that we already did this, but we did it to ourselves, child. We would just look at each other. I could see a black stranger across the room, and that black stranger could see me, and we could see a white stranger, all of us strangers in the room, doing something white and very, very odd. And we would have our own conversation about what that was. We wouldn't even have to audibly speak the conversation because we have telepathy. We don't really, but I mean, maybe. We would have the ability to communicate without saying a word, or we have this other language that y'all will never know called and we could just look at each other and be like, and we would not even have to say anything beyond that, but we would know that you, the white person in this example, had done something crazy and foolish that we believe is typical and indicative of white culture. We wouldn't say it. Now we're going to have to say it because you're joining the groups of those of us who have been racialized. Also interesting, because white people have often talked about black and brown and yellow and red people as if white is not a color. And I do know that there is some science that indicates that white isn't a color. It's actually the absence of color, which feels a little mean. So we're going to say it's a color for today's conversation. But in addition to this idea that when any individual one of you does a thing, that we will now attribute to all of you, you're also going to have to get labeled. You're going to have to get labels. So you know how there's like a category of food, and then there's a category called soul food, right? Or there's a category of hair products, and then there's a category called black hair care products. Now, what that typically has meant is that the hair products was for white people, but the white was silent. The food, the in the part of the grocery store that has no seasoning and that has no flavor that anybody else in the world would actually want, let alone try to colonize people for, that used to just be called food. It should now be called white food. European food, maybe, if we want to be ethnic about it, but European food definitely. But it should not just be allowed to be called food, particularly when all of it is food. This version of the food that is white food just has no seasoning, no culture, no flavor, and nothing attractive to anybody else. While the soul food obviously does, but it's not your fault. Mediocrity will do that to you. I want you all to take a listen to this example of white mediocrity in real life. And this is an example of the two new rules for whites. And the first rule is when an individual does something stupid, we're going to say that it attributes to all of you. And, we'll benefit. When an individual does something good, the other side of it is that usually when one of us as an individual does something good, white people will say, well, why can't you be Oprah? Why can't you be Michael Jordan? Why can't you? And so we will also use that for you as well. But you're going to see an example in this clip of a white male doing something very foolish that we're going to attribute to all of you. But then you're also going to hear well, you know what? Let's let you hear it. Let's let you hear it, and then you will get to experience it for yourself. YouTube, if you're watching, Urban View, if you're watching with the YouTube audience, I'm going to share this video. Oh, did it share? Hold on. It didn't even share. Hold on. Let me try it again. We're going to share the video because I want all of us to see what's happening in the world today. Amina, do we have this clip of the white man embarrassing himself and his people and his kind? All right, let's take a listen.
That is all.
Yo, I'm at Walgreens looking at freaking cards. Does anyone else think that this is whack? There's a whole section of cards for black people, and it's from Hallmark mahogany. That's fucked up, isn't it?
Gracious me. Oh my. Now I'm going to pause it right there because let's pause it right here because this is a clip that D.L. Hughley actually shared. And D.L. Hughley has been in his bag lately. I mean, he don't need me to tell him. We know it's been generational for that man, but he's doing a real good thing with his social media right now, in addition to all of his other work. But he posted that video, and we're going to hear his response in just a second. That video, for those of you who were not aware, that was a white male in the wild, in the store. And that white male did a thing that, unfortunately, it doesn't make the whites look good. He was at a store. Now, I don't know if the store was a card store or if it was just a store that also sold cards. But I am somebody I buy a lot of greeting cards. I buy greeting cards for every holiday, for birthdays, and all sorts of things. What I know about these sorts of installations of greeting cards is that if you are fortunate enough to be in a store that has a mahogany greeting card section, you are probably in a community that has a lot of people who relate to what it looks like to be mahogany. Now, this white male obviously had an education that was at least sufficient enough for him to know that mahogany meant a shade of brown. And so we will give him that. Kudos for you, white boy. You did a good job. But what we know is that if you are in a community that is sufficiently colored enough with other colors beyond white to have a mahogany card section, then what that also means is that you had to walk past an entire section of non-mahogany cards. And so this invokes the second new rule. Because you are new to this idea of being racialized white people, your second new rule is that y'all got to have labels, because it's a learning curve. You're behind the ball. I get it. But you got to have some labels to make it clear for you that you're not just the generic thing that all the rest of us are a derivative of. So that white boy walked past an entire, overwhelmingly, and I'm confident, exponentially larger section of greeting cards that were for white people. Now, how do we know they were for white people? Well, because they had white people on them doing the thing. So now what's weird about this is this white male, while he's probably going to be one of the ones who wants to claim racial grievance, couldn't really do so, because any of us who have ever seen a mahogany section, we all know that the mahogany section is always a fraction of the size of the larger card section. It's a fraction, just a smidgen of cards for the blacks. And they don't even have all the categories. Like sometimes if you're looking for a graduation, you might not find a mahogany graduation card. If you want a birthday card for an uncle, you're going to find it in the white section, but you're not going to find it in the mahogany section. So in order to dispel with confusion, this white man who walked past an entire section dedicated to him, dedicated to people who look like him, and he zeroed in on the mahogany section. Now we got to ask ourselves some questions, like what kind of cognitive dissonance would allow you to do a thing like that, you dummy? You walked past, all the cards were for you, but then I realized that they didn't have a label. And because of mediocrity, which is a fundamental part of whiteness culture, which we're going to explore in just a minute, he didn't know that the lack of label didn't mean it wasn't for... He didn't know. And so now, to make it easy for all of you, because we know that mediocrity is a cultural trait that you all pride yourselves in, we need you to have labels so that you don't have to make these mistakes that embarrass you anymore. You should be ashamed, white Americans, to be producing people this foolish. And so the label, I have a few suggestions for what you might want the label to be. I mean, maybe we could call it the alabaster card section, or the clutch my pearls section, or the eggshell section. I mean, there are so many ways to describe white. The same way that mahogany section could have been called ebony, could have been called charcoal, could have been called mint. There's so many words to describe so many colors. So pick a color. White, we don't mind, and we're flexible because we have been racialized ever since we stepped foot in this country. No, ever since y'all ancestors stepped foot in the land that we came from, we have been marginalized ever since then. So we get it and we understand it, but you should really do better. Now, the other challenge we have is that because of his own cognitive inability to make sense of things, so we were going to give him the labels, but now we got to ask ourselves, truly, what is happening in white American households that you all seem to continually produce this sort of mediocrity? We've got people like Pete, his own mama say he's trash Hegseth, who replaced a 4-star Brigadier General Lloyd Austin, who has run the military of like nations, like in entire regions of the planet. And that black man who sat in that position was summarily removed by the most mediocre of presidents, Donald J. Trump, and replaced with Pete, his own mama said he's trash Hegseth, who was so trashy his mama put a 2-page letter. A letter, not a 4-page letter. She wrote a 2-page letter to Pete to tell him what a trash-ass human being he was. He has been whiskey leaks from the beginning. He don't know how to text without including people who are technically his ops in the group chat. This man is cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, mediocre, and yet we continually see excuses made for them. Is it the home? Is it the presence of white mediocre fathers in the home? Should we send black social workers to investigate what is going on in your households that this continues to be a thing? And unfortunately, it is not just that he did that and then decided to talk about it online, but he also then went and posted it and used language and descriptions that are black languages and descriptions, black terminologies like whack. Like whack. And so I'm going to come back to him in just a minute, but I want you all to really hear this conversation that Joyanne Reed had on Wajahat Ali's Substack. And actually, the sister who you're going to see this video on, she is called Tabitha Speaks Politics. She's super dope. She does this. She's got a YouTube channel. I recently began following her, and she clipped this. I was looking for the clip, couldn't find a clip anywhere, and then Tabitha Speaks had clipped it and shared it. So we are going to share her video of them talking. This is Joyanne Reed talking with Wajahat. I think it's Wajahat Ali. If it's not, Amina, please correct me. Let's Wahaj, Mr. Ali. I think his last name is Ali. I'm sorry. His last name is Ali. I want y'all to take a listen to this conversation that Joy-Ann Reid has with Mr. Ali, whose name, I'm so sorry, sir. I butchered your name and I actually practiced, but my tongue is colonized, so I apologize. But I want y'all to take a listen to this conversation that Joy-Ann Reid has on Wajahat Ali's Substack, and this will basically explain to you why new rules for today's whites are important. Let's take a listen.
Donald Trump is the physical embodiment of all of America's sins.
Yeah, I agree completely.
Right? He's sloppy. He's unkempt. Everything about him is false. His hair is a pretense of non-baldness. He's old, but his followers try to pretend that he looks like Superman. He's a terrible businessman and a failure who gets to fake success because he's white, so banks keep lending him money even when he's failing. His father scoops money out of his siblings' inheritance to give him when he fails. He's a fuck up, but he's able to be a success because white America keeps saying, no, that guy is what success looks like. He's only a success on that TV show because when he was at his brokest, he gets hired to be on The Apprentice. His boardroom couldn't even be used on The Apprentice, and I found this out in my first, my Trump book, because it was so shoddy and unkempt. I went in Trump Tower in the 80s. It was tacky and sad. His marriage is a fraud. Melania clearly won't even touch him. The last time she let him touch her, they had Barron. Ooh. Clear that he ain't touching her now. Ooh. He doesn't believe in marriage. He doesn't have morality. He got 3 baby mamas, 5 children. Everything about him is a lie. He's not a Christian, but Christians love him. But he embodies the greed, the shamelessness, the lasciviousness of capitalism. And now also to your main, and I think really important point, the mediocrity. He could never be JFK. He's not handsome. He's not suave. He's not brave. He was never a war hero like JFK. He has none. Even RFK can never be JFK. None of these people stand up to JFK's legacy. But he can only get a theater named after him by stealing JFK's. Melania can only get a ballroom, the Kit Kat Club lady he met at the Kit Kat Club. We don't know who introduced him, but Jeffrey Epstein was around. She can only get a ballroom named after her by being married to Donald Trump. Donald Trump, he said himself, he could never get a Kennedy Center honor. Unworthy. But he can get one now. He can steal one because he owns a Kennedy Center. They can't fix the history they did. Their ancestors made this country into a slave hell. But they can clean it up now because they got the Smithsonian. They can get rid of all the slavery stuff. They got PragerU. They can lie about the history to the children. They can't originally invent anything more than they ever were able to invent good music. We black folk gave y'all country music, hip hop, R&B, jazz, rock and roll. They couldn't even invent that, but they have to call a white man the king. Because they couldn't make rock and roll. So they have to stamp the king on a man whose main song was stolen from an overweight black woman. You ain't nothing but a hound dog. Think about the lyrics. Why would a man, you ain't nothing but a hound dog, lying all the time? That's a song a woman sings about a man. He stole that song and made it a hit because he couldn't invent rock and roll. Even the Beatles knew that. They were like, we didn't invent this shit. We're singing black people's music. The Stones admitted it. So my whole thing is, when you invent a country where you don't tell white people that they need to innovate. Even Elon Musk didn't invent them damn Teslas. 2 other men invented it. He just bought it. And so when you tell them you don't have to be excellent, you just have to be white, you will get mediocrity. You will get mediocrity because they're not asking white people to be great. They're not asking them to be great. They're telling them you can be the opposite of great and be defense secretary. You can be the opposite of great and be Homeland Security Secretary. They're telling white people a lie so that they will believe that they have achieved when all they're doing is thieving greatness from other people. And I actually think that is a shame for white America. Because if you raised your kids that way, you would get brats. You would get monsters. You would get demons you don't even want at Thanksgiving. But we're raising an America that is mediocre on purpose because we don't want to tell Donald Trump that he is a fucking failure. But he is.
But he is. as one of the Nubians in the chat said, why can't white Americans be more like Jane Elliott? Why can't you be like Jimmy Carter? Why can't you be more like John Brown? Why do you ascribe to such mediocrity? Is it the presence of mediocre white maleness in the home? Somebody should interrogate the fathers. Now, it would be funny if we were just leaving this at the salacious. And apparently that man was in a Walgreens. So we all know good and goddamn well, ain't no Walgreens got a whole card section just for mahogany. I don't care if it's in Harlem or Bedford-Stuyvesant. They got mahogany next to everybody else's cards. And someone suggested a raw milk section might be an appropriate label because for reasons. Anyway, my point raising this is not just to laugh about it, but also to let you know that this has really serious implications. There was an attorney, I'm probably going to end up talking about this more on Monday, but I described this much more in depth in the podcast episode that's going to be out today at 2. Podcast is called Lurie Breaks It Down. But basically, there's this attorney, Alina Habba, who is the ultimate in WEI attorneyness. And WEI, again, is a phrase that I coined back in 2024 after the election when so many people were trying to push back on the use that of the term DEI, the right-wing white nationalists were saying that DEI was a slur. And we all know that diversity, equity, inclusion could never be a slur because if I'm a diversity, equity, and inclusion hire, I had to be twice as good just to get us half as far as you did. So by the time we got to where you got to, the destination, I'm 4 times better than you, baby. Do the math. Argue with your math teacher. Don't argue with me. And so I created WEI as a way of saying, no, Pete, his own mama said he's trash Hegseth, who is now the defense secretary, is not a DEI hire. Lloyd Austin was a DEI hire. He was a 4-star brigadier general who was leading nations and leading militaries across entire regions of the planet. That's diversity, equity, and inclusion. He could run his pinky toe could run circles in terms of qualifications over Pete. His own mama said he's trash Hegseth. But Pete gets to be mediocre. He gets to be Whiskey Leaks. He gets to skeet international secrets all over chat groups that anybody can hack. And he gets to be considered qualified. This is the problem of mediocrity. But there's another real world example, Alina Habba, the ultimate WEI attorney. And this is an example that white people will destroy their own systems of government just to say that they own it because of the mediocrity that's within their culture. It's not them as people, it's the culture. But basically, a federal judge ruled last week or earlier this week that Alina Habba, who has been serving as a New Jersey, as New Jersey's U.S. attorney with no legal authority, has been in that position for a month, which has completely paralyzed the state's federal court system and essentially is going to now put limits on Donald Trump's presidential power and his ability to choose his top prosecutors. According to the judge, quote, faced with the question of whether Ms. Habba is lawfully performing the functions and duties of the office of the United States Attorney for the District of New Jersey, I conclude that she is not, said Judge Matthew W. Braun of the Middle District of Pennsylvania. He says, because she is not currently qualified to exercise the functions and duties of the office in an acting capacity, she must be disqualified from participating in any ongoing cases. You about to lose your job. She gonna need to lose her job, but she probably won't because the mediocre nature of white culture will protect her. And in fact, that is exactly what's happening. Now, essentially, the judge, though he knew that she was not qualified, and if you ain't even qualified to be acting, baby, who the hell put you in that position? It was another mediocre person. I know exactly who it was. His name starts with D and ends with ump. And Pam Bondi, who is another example of WEI mediocrity, who is also our United States Attorney General, said the following: Ms. Habba is doing incredible work in New Jersey, and we will protect her position from activist judicial attacks because this is what mediocre whiteness will drive them to do. It will drive them to not be rational. It will drive them to sabotage their own systems to protect themselves. It's very much like, remember that story we learned that happened on that other planet about this group of the Fragile Whites? It is so similar to the Fragile Whites, which is a purely fictional account of the nature of white supremacy, but they're giving Fragile White. And Ms. Habba, whose previous experience include like being an attorney for a car rental company and being Donald Trump's personal lawyer. I believe she was the one who was his personal lawyer when he got convicted of 34 felony counts. And even though the fees from his convictions got tossed out yesterday because the judges in New York was being stupid, basically, like, she's not a good lawyer. She's the reason he is a convicted felon right now because she was a part of his legal team. Basically, she was appointed in March for a 120-day term as an interim acting U.S. attorney. Trump nominates her to take on the role permanently, but the actual attorneys in the legal system in New Jersey were like, what the fuck? The Jersey senators said that they was going to block her, which is a senator's prerogative to do. Last month, there was a panel of federal judges who was like, you have tenure. We are not going to extend it. We are declining to extend it. And we're going to put an actual qualified attorney in that position. And they did. Her name was Desiree L. Grace. Now, Desiree L. Grace, an actual attorney who is actually qualified to do actual things and to think actual thoughts and to write legally and to argue and advocate in powerful ways. She was appointed to this position. And then Donald Trump's mediocrity kicked in. And as a result, they decided to fire her. Pam Bondi fired her. And essentially, we're in a position right now where mediocre nature of leadership is still happening. And I, again, discussed this way more extensively in the podcast episode, which will be out later on today. So new rules for today's whites. Number one thing that you do that is foolish is now going to be attributed to all of you. And number two, we're going to have to label all y'all shit. You don't just get to be the card section. It's the alabaster raw milk section. You don't just get to be the anything. You're going to have a label, because if you want to claim racial oppression, you want to claim racial abuse, then join us, take a number, and stand the fuck in line. And in the back, because on this side of things, we do things equitably. And we've been here on this side of the line way longer than you. So your claims will get to eventually.